Culture. We hear that word a lot. What does it actually mean and where is ours headed? Also, globalism, immigration. Is it bad? Is it good? How much is bad and good? Finally, riding a Ferris wheel. There are ways to do it, and there are ways to not do it. All that's coming up right now on I'm Right. Well, surprise, surprise, Barack Obama cannot just retire in quiet. He's out there giving speeches, undoubtedly speeches that mean he's somehow gotten himself in trouble with Michelle Obama, speeches that are talking about woman power and women are the best and women this and women that. And it got me thinking, culture. What is culture? Where's our culture going? What is our culture telling boys? Before we get to that, here's the former president of the United States of America, Barack Obama, quote, "If you look at the world and look at the problems, it's usually old people, usually men not getting out of the way." Oh gosh, here we go. Yes, it's old men. That's the real problem with society today. Oh, he went on. It got worse from there. Quote, "I'm absolutely confident that for 2 years, if every nation on earth was run by women, you would see a significant improvement across the board on just about everything, living standards and outcomes," end quote. Well, let's set aside the obvious stupid pandering and the obvious fact that he's wrong about all those things. Let's take a step back and get a little bit broader with this. You hear the term culture war all the time. We're in a culture war. There's a culture war. What about the culture war? What about our culture? What is culture? No one really wants to talk about what it means. Well, a culture is simply this. Each society decides on a set of values. They do. You can act like, well, I mean, anything goes. It's just freedom. That's our culture. That's not true. Societies have cultures. Societies have certain carrots and sticks where they lead their citizens to go. These can be really good ones. These can be really bad ones. It totally depends on the period of time. It totally depends on what your interpretation of good and bad is. But nevertheless, you cannot discount culture. Culture is what your kids see, what your kids see everywhere they go, what your kids see when they turn on the television set, what your kids hear when they turn on music, what your kids are learning in school when they're away from you for 7-8 hours a day, what your kids are learning from their friends, what your kids are learning from their toys, from their books, from their parents, from their church, from their little league. Culture is everything around you. It is everything you're consuming at all times. And knowing that now, what is culture telling boys? What is our culture telling girls? American culture in 2019 has taken a very distinct, odd direction. I would call it an absolutely horrible direction, and that direction is simply this. We hate boys. We want boys to become girls. And no, I don't just mean that in the literal sense of the word, although if a boy were to turn himself into a woman, he would undoubtedly be celebrated. In fact, he'd probably get a spot on Good Morning America, like that other drag kit, where they'd be clapping like little seals about the poor child who's been destroyed by his parents. No, I'm talking about we want to take boys and their mannerisms and their emotions, and we want to turn them into women. On top of that, we pretend as if women are these all saintly beings. They're angels. You see, men are all these stupid, immoral, dumb, ignorant buffoons that, gosh, I just can't get out of bed in the morning without my wife there to help me tie my shoes. And women are, of course, these saintly, wonderful angels. They've never made any mistakes before. In fact, you heard it from the man himself. Only women should be in charge, and all the world's problems would be solved. What a bunch of crap. You don't have to look hard, ladies and gentlemen. When's the last time you saw a comic book out there or any kind of children's book called Empowering Boys? Let me save you the trouble. You haven't seen it. Nevertheless, we have them out there, empowering women, girl power, bunch of superheroes. When's the last time you saw, we're going to do international aid to help boys, to push boys along, to help boys learn how to go from being boys to becoming men, good men, strong men? You don't see that much, do you? You see it all over the place. Again, when you turn on the television set, it's everywhere. Not just movies. You know, every movie has to have a set number of women, and of course the women better be the leaders and the guy better be the evil scumbag. No, we're talking about, this is something that's been ingrained in our society for years. I believe the show The Simpsons has been running for 30 years. Who was the main character of The Simpsons? Oh, it's the oafish moron Homer Simpson. And look, I like The Simpsons. I'm not singling them out specifically. I enjoy The Simpsons as much as the next man, but they're just simply one of a million different examples I could choose from. Look at every single nightly sitcom. What's the family dad? Ah, look at the idiot. We better wait till mom's home so we can get some leadership and guidance. Men really suck. It's all over the place. It's everywhere you see. It's in our schools. It's all over the place. There was an article out just recently, I believe it was yesterday, in the Atlantic titled "The Miseducation of the American Boy." And in it, she very eloquently goes down the list, and boys are too rough. Boys are too violent. Boys need more girl toys and more gay friends. That's what boys need in America. She lays it out very clearly in the article. Well, that's a culture, ladies and gentlemen. That is a barrage. It's not just affecting children, it's affecting adult men, and that men and boys think they're supposed to become more like women. You're not. You're supposed to become a strong man. You're supposed to become a protector. You're supposed to become a leader. That's what you're supposed to do in a society as a man. Yes, it's fine if you want to express some emotion now and then, but we don't have to constantly beat into the heads of our young boys that, well, I mean, you need to be more in touch with your feelings. Let's go have a tea party with all the girls. No, he's a boy. He should be out with sticks and balls and getting muddy and getting bloody. That's part of what boys do. We do this in school. We see it all the time. I believe the great Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. Our education system is 100% geared towards girls. You get 20 minutes of recess and 7 hours of sitting in class, and you better make sure you're this. Don't move around or don't get too rambunctious. Somebody call the pharmacist. Let's get this kid on drugs. He just moved around too much. People, being a boy, being a man is a wonderful thing. Societies need men as much as they need women. Yes, both are important. This is not about being anti-women. Women should be treasured. Women should be protected at all times. Love your wives, your sisters, your moms, your grandma. Yes, of course. Hold doors open for them. Treat them like queens. But the man is not supposed to be some helpless, oafish, beta, weakling of a man, some doormat who has to prostrate himself before the almighty woman and ask her for permission if he can go to the store and get a 6-pack of beer. That is not what our society is supposed to be. That's not what any successful society will ever be. And so when I see crap like this, it drives me nuts. And look, I gave you 4 or 5 examples. The show is only an hour long. I could fill up a week's worth of shows never going off the air with example after example after example on what our culture has become. And what our culture has become is telling boys, telling men that what they are, what their basic biology is, the way God made them is wrong. Well, that is wrong. If you have a boy, if you have a son, raise him to be a strong man, period. Raise him to be a protector, raise him to look out for the weak, raise him to look out for women, but do not raise him to be a servant to anybody. Don't raise him to be a little lemming whose natural instincts are evil. I can't believe you couldn't sit still for 4 hours of algebra. Go to your room and write me 9,000 sentences on why math is fun. Let the boy go outside and play. Let the boy wrestle with his brother. I promise they'll be okay. When he comes in with a bloody nose, get him cleaned up and pat him on the back. Get him a popsicle. Don't scold him. Let boys become men. Let boys be rough and tough. And I'll tell you another little secret. Girls want them to be that. No one wants to talk about that either. You see, every woman-dominated culture and institution today wants to convince you, a man or a mom, that little boy you're raising, he really should spend more time crying and moisturizing his hands. And then we wonder why fertility rates are going down, and we have these poor young women, beautiful young women these days in their 20s and 30s that look around and say, where'd all the men go? Well, you told them they weren't supposed to be one, and the men let it happen. Don't let it happen. Don't let it happen here. We are culturally telling our boys and men to become women, and that's a bad thing. Men are supposed to be men. Women are supposed to be women. I know that's radical in this day and age. To talk about that and some other things, we are going to bring on the great Amber Athey. She joins me next. Hang on. Joining me now to talk about culture and other things, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, Amber Athey. Amber, I argue that we have gotten way, way crazy with this stupid stuff. Barack Obama's out there talking about women should rule the world and women should run every country. And look, if people want to do the, women's track and field, I've always been a fan of things like that. But I think we've gone way over the board with empower girls at all aspects.
It's unbelievably patronizing for former President Barack Obama to come out and talk about how women are supposed to be better than men. It's just this insane feminist theory that women have gone past equality now and have somehow achieved some superhuman status and are now actually better human beings than men. As a woman myself, and I said this on Twitter yesterday, I can confirm that women are in fact just as terrible as men. I tend to believe all humans are pretty terrible, and women certainly are no exception. But clearly Obama is trying to pander to this progressive feminist crowd that somehow thinks women are better than everybody else. And it just comes across as really patronizing and like he's just trying to pander to these people rather than actually coming up with real solutions to the problems that we have in our society.
Amber, I hear this stuff and my eyeballs get stuck pointing to the back of my head because I roll them so hard. And I know you do too, but I always worry about these things that they're actually effective with the morons out there. I mean, let's just be honest. There are plenty of stupid voters. I don't have to be very nice to everybody. That's not my job. Does this work with some people? I mean, the GOP is always underwater with women massively. Does this stuff work with these suburban moms?
With suburban moms, no. I think this is specifically catered to the progressive millennial class of perpetually aggrieved individuals. When you actually were going on Twitter and looking at people, even from relatively leftist publications like Vox and Vice, even they were mocking Obama for this. So this is to a very, very small group of people. And this is exactly what the Democrats have done over the past couple of years, is they have completely shifted their own Overton window to catering to a small demographic of the party that has an outsized voice because they're very loud and screechy. But the vast majority of voters do not like to hear this nonsense. And the Democrats are paying for it because right now you're looking at a far left progressive field that's going to have a really difficult time capturing what is known as the Obama vote of the blue collar, middle American, rural class that Trump was able to swing over to the Republican Party. If the Democrats keep trying to make everything about catering to the farthest left individual in their party, there is no way that they are going to get those people back on their side.
Amber, what if they figure it out? I mean, I don't have any hope they're going to figure it out before 2020. These absolute idiots are already talking about impeaching Trump again, even after this last one is absolutely splattered all over their face. So it's not like I think this is about to happen. But what do they need to figure out? Because the country's not that far right, not at all. It's very much towards the, the mushy middle. I understand I'm far right of where the country is. What if Democrats figure out how to actually speak to women or blue collar people? Do you think there's any chance of that in the future?
It just seems like right now, all of the field has gone so far left that you can't really go back to the middle at this point because it's going to be used against you in the general election. When you have every candidate on stage raising their hand to agree to give free health care to illegal immigrants, when you're talking about a massive gun buyback program, you can't just take back those positions, right? In the general election, the Trump campaign is going to hammer you for that all day long. You're going to be labeled a socialist, and it's game over.
Pete Buttigieg, or whatever his name is, why is he underwater? I'm genuinely curious because I have to admit, when he came out, I thought he was going to be the media darling. He speaks really well. I mean, he's a total commie. I can't stand the guy, but he speaks really well. He's gay, so the media fell in love with him right away. Oh, look how gay he is and all this other stuff. And he just is not getting traction in the Democrat primary. Why?
I think there are two reasons. You see him polling well in Iowa and New Hampshire, but then take a look at his support among Black people. It is really, really low. Something like 2% of Black Democrats want to support Buttigieg. That's going to kill him in places like South Carolina, Florida, and other states with a high population of minorities. And also, there have been a number of think pieces basically attacking him for not being gay enough. Pete Buttigieg has famously focused on his family values, the fact that he is, happily married in a monogamous relationship. He talks about being a Christian. Those are things that are not overwhelmingly popular with, again, that far left progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And so you do have people at publications like Slate and Vox and Vice and the Huffington Post coming out attacking Buttigieg for not pandering to this gender queer, transgender portion of the LGBTQ plus community. Instead, he's apparently too focused on his own very narrow traditional marriage. Well, I guess now it's considered a traditional marriage by the left standards with his husband, Chasten.
Are we fracturing? I have this theory out there. I'm sure you've seen it because I'm so popular, but I have this theory out there that America is fracturing, that we are splitting apart and we're heading this way quickly. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic. I don't think there's going to be a civil war or something like that. It's just, I mean, honestly, I hear these things like you just said, and you're 100% right. I mean, Pete Buttigieg or whatever isn't gay enough. What? The left is gone.
Yeah, it's gone completely crazy. This is what happens when you start playing identity politics. People start competing in the oppression Olympics to determine who is the most marginalized member of society. So you now have this crazy nonsense where a gay man is apparently not oppressed enough because he's not a black gay man or he's not a black genderqueer. And people start competing and trampling over each other and then casting away people who would like to be their allies. And that's not how you build a winning coalition. This is how you fracture people, how you make your party more divisive, and you push away a lot of people who would otherwise be willing to listen to your ideas. And this is going to be a disastrous move, this embrace of identity politics for the left.
You work in the White House. I mean, you don't have to Tommy Topper us. We get it. You work in the White House. Who's somebody cool that we wouldn't think is cool?
As somebody who works in the White House, Jesse, I can tell you that none of them are cool.
Yes, see, I knew it. I knew it all along. All right.
Confirmed.
Now, this is a legitimate question. Why is the food so terrible in D.C.? And I really do mean this, honestly, because there's all the money in the world in D.C. All the world powers are there, all the fancy leaders. You have all the ingredients. I mean, it's completely Democrat, which sadly normally means there's great food. That has all the ingredients of having great food. And as far as a big city goes, the airports suck and the food is even worse. It doesn't make any sense at all.
I actually have two theories about this. First, I think that the best food does not come from rich people. Traditionally, the best food is made by people who had to scrape together what little means they had to make something absolutely delicious. That's why things like Mexican food and various other cultures have such delicious food, and American food kind of sucks. Well, American food's fine, but there's nothing special about it. And then two, I think rich people have kind of shifted in culturally, because it used to be that if you were wealthy, you were also really, really fat because you loved to eat all the time because you had access to all of this food. I think now it's actually in vogue for rich people to be thin and to avoid eating, because eating is something that they don't have to do. They can have their weird little kale smoothies, and they can starve themselves and look as thin and beautiful as possible in their designer clothing. I think eating now is gauche for the rich.
Are you trying to say I shouldn't have got my wife exercise equipment for Christmas?
I'm on board with the Peloton bike. I think that man is a hero.
Amber Athey, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. Thank you so much for giving us some time today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Coming right up, globalization, immigration, all these words you hear all the time. What do they actually mean, and what is right and what is wrong? Well, obviously I know, so I'll tell you. Hang on. Well, Joe Biden made some news, and some bizarre news. At least it's a bizarre thing to say on the campaign trail. Joe Biden came out and said, quote, as president, Biden will work with Congress to increase the number of visas awarded for permanent employment-based immigration. Now, that's going to fly by the radar. Undoubtedly, not another host will even discuss this at length, but let's dig into this for just a moment. Let's talk about globalization and immigration and how these things should work in any society. Now, we don't talk about them much here in America because we have what we call a shame society these days. And I have a theory on this. Hang with me. I call it the gladiator theory. And what is the gladiator theory? Well, you see in ancient Rome that needs no introduction. Everybody's seen the movie with Russell Crowe stabbing people, and it's awesome. Everybody's seen the movie Gladiator. Ancient Rome had gladiatorial games. People killing each other, people killing prisoners, people killing animals, animals killing people, a big old blood and gore fest. The people absolutely loved it. They packed the house. If we were to snap our fingers and magically teleport an ancient Roman gladiatorial game in the middle of Lincoln, Nebraska, in a gigantic stadium, what do you think the public response would be? You know what the public response would be. Every single animals' rights, prisons' rights, humans' rights, rights. Every single group in the world would come out and say it's the worst thing in the history of the world, and this is disgusting, and this is evil, and this is deadly, and it was wrong, and every news site would be all over it, and there'd be mass protests and boycotts. Somebody probably try to bomb the thing, and they would tell you on every single newscast and every single late night show, and there'd be Hollywood movies made about it, and TV shows, and 8 million articles about how this is evil, and it's wrong, and it's evil, and it's wrong, and it's evil, and it's wrong. And so what would happen? They would open up and they'd have some gigantic gladiatorial game. And people wouldn't go. And you'd ask people about it on the street, and you'd put them on camera, or you'd do telephone polls. What do you think about the gladiatorial games? And they'd say, well, I'm not going. That's evil. That's disgusting. That's gross. It's wrong. It's and the pay-per-view numbers would shatter records. You didn't change anybody's mind. You didn't change people's mind. You shamed people. That's the gladiator theory, and it's 100% right. We have the same problem in the United States of America today with immigration. Not just illegal immigration, legal immigration. And we have this problem because, just like I said, every Hollywood movie, every article, every tweet, everything out there is, don't be racist. That's racist. You're a bigot. Don't talk about immigration or it's bigoted. Ladies and gentlemen, every nation in the history of mankind has decided on what they think is an appropriate level of immigration for their country. That is in no way radical. Now you find yourself ever standing up there screaming that all these people from this country are evil. That's probably not good. That's probably a little bit bigoted. But if you find yourself saying, we don't actually need any more immigrants from Somalia, we have plenty of them here, that's not bigoted. That's maybe a sane way to look at things, or in the very least, a reasonable opinion. How are the immigrants from this country performing in our country when they come here? Oh, they're doing great? Great, let's have some more. Oh, they're not doing so well? Okay, let's cut them off. Does that not sound like the most reasonable thing in the world? It is. Do you know how radical that is? The hate mail, as I just said those words, is already pouring into the headquarters of the First as we speak. I guarantee it. Now, thank God, I work for the First, and I won't get in any trouble at all. In fact, if you send enough hate mail, I'll probably even get a raise. That's the way it works around here. Thank God for this channel. So globalization, immigration, people get so scared to talk about these things. And globalization necessarily isn't a bad word. It's just like so many things, just like immigration in the United States of America has been taken too far. You don't, as a nation, want to become, the fictional place like Wakanda with no trade and no commerce with the outside world. That's not a place you want to be. But you also don't want to constantly sell out your own people in the name of cheap goods. We have done that in the United States of America for decade after decade after decade after decade, and then we wonder why all the, quote, globalist candidates got thrown out on their rear ends, and the first, kind of insular candidate, Donald Trump, sits as president of the United States, and he's about to be reelected for a second term. The American people have every right to reject selling out their own sovereignty for someone else's economy so someone else can come here. And you know what? That applies to every single country, and that's not a radical notion. The people in Mexico, a Mexican, has every single right to put their country first. They have every single right to demand that the Mexican government put the Mexican people first. The Canadian people have every single right to demand that their government put Canadian people first, so on and so forth. That's how nations should work. Again, that doesn't mean you retreat behind high walls and you never have allegiances and you never trade. That's ridiculous, and it's not realistic in this day and age we live in. But ladies and gentlemen, when you have American steel towns wiped out, when you have families now generationally hooked on opioids, suicide problems, rampant poverty in cities that used to boom because you sold their jobs overseas to China, whether you think that's a good thing or bad thing, I hope you think it's a bad thing, there was always going to be a response to that. Donald Trump was the response to that. I find quotes like this from Joe Biden extremely bizarre, and that I find these quotes that I think they're going to be extremely unpopular. And that it's really weird that all of Washington, the entire Washington, D.C. power structure, honestly, most of the GOP as well, and all the Democrats seem married to this fact that we shouldn't do anything to help our people. What will help our people, what we should be doing, is just throw the doors open to everything in the world. And ladies and gentlemen, this really applies to immigration. Pay attention, because I mean this all the way. Immigration is the civil rights issue of our time, mass immigration. I don't even have to just talk about America. Look what has happened in the once great country of Germany. Look what Angela Merkel has done to that nation. The people are furious about it. The Europeans are flatly rejecting what happened, but it's too late. Throwing open the doors of your country and just allowing millions into it to flood? Millions of people who have to be giving classes to teach them that rape is wrong. I'm not making that up. We have the formerly peaceful place known as Sweden with bombs going off every single day, acid attacks. It's terrible what has happened. And the leaders don't care. That's why it's such a civil rights issue, because all these people, whether it be America, Germany, France, the UK, wherever you want to go, that tell you, God, you better believe in mass immigration or you're a bigot. You notice all the people making these decisions always live behind high walls, behind bodyguards, behind massive police protection. It's a civil rights issue because the people who immigration negatively affects, they can't afford to escape it. Yes, that's great. It's very compassionate to, we're just going to take another 50,000 from Somalia this year. Isn't that okay? Look how compassionate we are. Look how nice we are to the people of Somalia. Well, don't be a bigot and say anything about it. Well, that's easy for you to say. Ask the people of Minneapolis who can't afford to move out to the suburbs how that's currently working out for them. I'll tell you a little hint. It's not working out very well. And the things people tell me offline, the things people have been shamed into being quiet about, remember the gladiator theory, would horrify you about what's actually happening on the ground in these places. I don't have the exact answers as to how many people should come from here and how many should come from there. I know the answer obviously shouldn't be zero. That's ridiculous. But I also know the answer shouldn't be, well, whoever wants to. That's absurd, and it's a violation of your national sovereignty, and don't you dare let anybody in this world call you a bigot for believing that. To talk about that and other things, we have a great guest coming up for you on top of the fact, but I want to make sure I throw this out there. Do not miss the Ferris wheel video we're going to play you on this show. It's one you're going to want to see. Hang on. Well, the Joe Biden plan, it is this. This is something, quote, as president, Biden will work with Congress to increase the number of visas awarded for permanent employment-based immigration, end quote. Joining me now to talk about that and other things, the publisher of Human Events, Will Chamberlain. Will, have these people learned nothing about the Trump movement, about the anti-globalist, anti-immigration movement at all?
I mean, generally speaking, no. I think Biden is trying to thread the needle here between the absurd radical left proposals that people like Bernie Sanders are adopting, things like decriminalizing border crossings and straight up abolishing immigrations and custom enforcement. But in general, this is a pretty radical plan, even from a moderate like Biden, where you've got a massive increase in almost every type of immigration visa and a massive decrease in almost every type of immigration enforcement activity.
Will, what is appropriate? And I was thinking about that horrible appropriations bill, which we're going to get into in a moment. But
Mm,
what is appropriate when it comes to immigration? Because this is what I don't like. We live in a shame society now where you're never allowed to even discuss legal immigration levels without being accused of a bigot and racist. That
right.
you just hate people from here. Any society in the history of the world will decide, okay, we want this many people and no more. That's normal.
Yeah, sure. I'm a big believer in the idea that if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. And the idea of having a country is being able to distinguish the people who are within your circle of care from the people that are outside it. And as a result, if you are well, essentially, if you're making it so that anyone can be within the circle of care, then you really don't care about anyone at all, right? It's the idea that if you love everyone, then you love no one.
What is globalization in your mind, and why is it being so roundly rejected now? Because this is not just in the United States, man. We see Brexit happening. We see a real nationalist push, really, in all the Western societies right now. How did this happen? How did this pendulum swing the other way?
So, are you referring to globalization or globalism? Right. I think they're two different things.
Globalism.
Uh, Globalism. Okay. So I think that's being rejected because I think people actually feel a very strong affinity with their country. I think it's a very natural human instinct and one that has real power everywhere in the world. Everyone has a love of place. And to the extent that you are essentially trying to force people to not have love of place instead and but love all of humanity, that I mean it's just so abstract and intangible that nobody can really get their head around it or feel that kind of obligation. And so there's a consistent desire for people to return to supporting their own nations, which is just a very good thing, I would think.
Have they really been sold out as bad as so many people believe? Because look, I always try to be understanding of every part of it, or at least somewhat understanding of every part of it. And lots of this turns out to be sour grapes sometimes of he sold me out when he really did, and that's just the way it goes. But I also believe politicians have been totally irresponsible and uncaring of the American worker. How bad has the sellout actually been?
I mean, it's been pretty bad. If you look at the Rust Belt and you look at a whole bunch of places where for 20 years you were just seeing factory after factory get shut down, and just massive economic dislocation. And the answer from coastal elites was, well, learn to code, right? Go find another job. Clearly, we need to do something else. That's looking back, it just strikes me as so callous, and so uncaring for your fellow American and your fellow citizen. And I don't know. I think that the modern Republican Party that finds that sort of fraternity and nationalism is actually doing something right, and getting past the sort of it's almost like an anti-nationalism that the Republican Party used to believe in because it was so uncaring about the plight of fellow citizens.
How did that happen, Will? Was that just simply a, corporate donor influence thing with the GOP? How does something like that come about? I mean, it's not unusual to have the leadership of any country at any point in history be disconnected from, the average worker. That's not unusual. But for the Republican Party to swing so far that way, is it just the corporate donor thing?
I think it starts probably with the fact that the Republican Party aligned to oppose communism, right? To oppose in the Soviet Union, and as a result, that you have the collection of different constituencies in the Republican Party are all sort of opposed to the Soviets in one way or the other, right? You had social conservatives who opposed the Soviet Union's atheism. You had libertarians opposed to the economic system, and you had the foreign policy hawks. And so that's the entire, like those three legs of the stool, they all coalesced. They don't necessarily actually have a lot in common necessarily, but they coalesced in the face of the Soviet Union. But now that the Soviet Union's gone, suddenly like we're examining these things again, and it's like, okay, we aren't going to be a communist country if we have some tariffs to protect jobs in the Midwest. Like let's not overreact.
Will, this spending bill, man, I have to tell you, I'm normally pretty bright and sunny, but when I see a $1.37 trillion spending bill, I see it's over 1,700 pages, less than 24 hours to read it, and I see President Donald Trump is going to sign it. By all indications, he's going to sign it. This is going to breeze through the House and Senate, man. This is one of those times where I just feel like throwing all my papers in the air and storming out of the studio. What is this crap?
I mean, it's the way our government works in 2019. I think I don't know that there's just that big a concern from the government anymore. Also saw it in the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson is effectively saying the same thing, where he's going to talk about spending in Britain. You have this economic populism, and what that means is that people just don't care that much about spending cuts.
Will Chamberlain, publisher, Human Events, thank you so much for giving us some time tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Coming up next, some people shouldn't be on a Ferris wheel. Hang on. We are coming up on Christmas Day. It is the Christmas season. Christmas music is playing, and we know what this time is about, right? This is about the birth of Jesus. This is about giving back. This is about coming together to love your friends, love your family, love thy neighbor, all that stuff. It's a time to treat people well. It's also a time to play absolutely abusive practical jokes exploiting the people you love the most, like what you see here with these people who tricked this young lady into getting onto a Ferris wheel.
We're at the stationary park.
Lex, close your eyes. No! That's worse! I gotta know. Oh, God.
No,
Oh, my God!
Hey, FaceTime your mom right now.
No! She's no! Ah!
People are looking at you.
I don't care! I don't like this! Ah! I'm so sorry.
Oh, that is good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, take the time to do that to somebody you love this Christmas season. We'll be back and better than ever tomorrow. I'll talk to you then.